Centuries of searching have led us to a dead end. The legendary lost city of Atlantis is not where everyone thought. And today you will see the evidence that redraws the map of ancient history entirely. We are leaving behind the crowded Mediterranean and the viral internet theories for a journey across forgotten texts, impossible geology, and a cataclysm that reshaped the world. By the end, you will possess a radical new perspective on where this advanced civilization truly flourished and fell. We will examine why the most famous candidates crumble under scrutiny and what startling clues point to a continent no one expected. How does a story survive for thousands of years, and what truth might be buried at its core? What does it say about us that we are still so desperate to find it? Our entire quest begins with two ancient books written by the philosopher Plato around 360 years before the Common Era. These dialogues, called Timaeus and Critias, are not history books in our modern sense. They are philosophical conversations where the story of Atlantis is presented as a true account of a great forgotten war. Plato paints the picture through a chain of whispers across time. He says the tale was told to the Athenian lawgiver Solon by wise Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. These priests claimed the Greeks had forgotten their own past, that a magnificent civilization had existed 9,000 years before Solon's own time. This places the height of Atlantis around 9,600 years before the Common Era, a date so impossibly ancient it pushes the story into the realm of myth for many scholars. But let's look at what those priests described. They spoke of a vast island empire located in the Atlantic Ocean, quote, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That is the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar, the gateway between the Mediterranean and the open Atlantic. This single phrase has launched 1,000 expeditions because it seems to point a clear finger westward into the ocean. This empire, called Atlantis, was said to be marvelously engineered. Its capital city was built on a hill, surrounded by concentric rings of land and water, connected by great canals and bridges. The people possessed advanced technology for their age, harnessing metals like orichalcum, a mysterious bronze-like alloy that shone with a fiery light. They were a naval power, a wealthy society that eventually grew arrogant and launched an unprovoked war against the ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean, including a prehistoric Athens. And then the climax. After their defeat, the gods grew angry with the pride of the Atlanteans. In a single day and night of misfortune, as Plato writes, the island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and vanished. This is the core of the legend, a cataclysm so complete it erased a superpower from the map and from memory, leaving only a cautionary tale whispered by Egyptian priests. For centuries, every serious search for a real Atlantis has started with these clues, like a detective scrutinizing a 2,000-year-old witness statement. The location beyond the pillars, the concentric city, the advanced culture, the sudden sinking. Most theories take these descriptions literally, then scour the globe for a place that matches. But what if we are reading the clues too literally? What if Plato or the priests before him were encoding a different kind of truth within this epic story? To find a real Atlantis, we may first need to understand why the most obvious places it could not be. The most persistent modern theory places Atlantis not in the Atlantic at all, but squarely in the Mediterranean Sea. The leading candidate is the island of Santorini, known in ancient times as Thera. Around 1,600 years before the Common Era, this island was home to a thriving outpost of the Minoan civilization, a sophisticated Bronze Age culture centered on Crete. Then the volcano at its heart exploded in one of the largest eruptions in human history. The cataclysm was apocalyptic, sending tsunamis across the Aegean that likely devastated Minoan coastal settlements and contributed to their decline. Here, at last, we seem to have a perfect match for Plato's story, a real advanced society destroyed in a single day and night. It is a compelling and logical theory, which is precisely why it has become so popular. But the moment you hold it up against the actual clues from the ancient texts, the theory begins to unravel. First and most damning is the timeline. Plato is unequivocal. His Egyptian priest said Atlantis fell 9,000 years before Solon's time, placing its destruction around 9,600 years before the Common Era. The thorough eruption happened around 1,600. That is a discrepancy of 8,000 years, a gap so vast it cannot be explained away as a simple scribble error or a misunderstanding. It is the difference between the end of the last ice age and the Bronze Age. Next is the location. Plato's Atlantis was explicitly beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. Thera is deep inside the Aegean Sea, firmly within the Mediterranean, a sea the Atlanteans were supposedly trying to invade from the outside. Proponents sometimes argue that the term Pillars of Hercules could have meant something else to the Egyptians, but this feels like special pleading to make the evidence fit. Finally, consider the scale. Plato describes an island continent larger than Libya and Asia combined, a naval empire that could field an army to conquer the Mediterranean. The Minoans were a magnificent culture, but their realm was an island-based thalassocracy, not a continental superpower. Thera itself is a small, crescent-shaped island. The size simply does not align. Other Mediterranean candidates suffer similar fatal flaws. Some point to the lost city of Tartessos in southern Spain, a wealthy trading culture that vanished. It is closer to the Atlantic side of the Pillars, but it disappeared centuries after Plato wrote, not millennia before, and its description bears little resemblance to the concentric ringed metropolis. The Mediterranean is littered with sunken ports and drowned settlements, each one a tantalizing piece of a puzzle, but none that match the complete picture. This is the Mediterranean trap. We are searching for a lost civilization in a well-documented, densely studied sea, trying to shrink a continent-sized legend to fit an island-sized reality. The similarities are seductive, a volcanic eruption here, a flooded city there, but they are echoes, not the source. If we are ever to find a real Atlantis, we must break free from this inland sea and look where the story originally pointed, to the vast, open Atlantic. But what could possibly be out there? Plato's most famous clue is also his most misunderstood. The phrase "beyond the Pillars of Hercules" seems straightforward, a simple navigational instruction pointing west from the Mediterranean into the open Atlantic. But to an ancient Greek mind, this was not a simple direction. It was a profound boundary, the edge of the known world. The pillars themselves are not in doubt. They are the twin promontories flanking the Strait of Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar in Europe and Mount Achah in Africa. For centuries, this was the ultimate horizon. To sail beyond them was to leave the safe, encircling waters of the Mediterranean, the Great Sea, and enter the terrifying and limitless ocean, a realm of monsters, chaos, and the unknown. So when an Egyptian priest tells Solon that Atlantis lay beyond these pillars, he is not giving a street address. He is describing a place of mythic distance outside the civilized order. This opens a fascinating riddle. What did beyond truly mean? For a Greek sailor standing at Gibraltar, looking west, beyond meant the vast Atlantic Ocean. But looking south along the coast of Africa, that too was technically beyond the pillars. Many early theories, including some from antiquity itself, suggested Atlantis could be found somewhere along that African coastline. Yet Plato's description of a huge island continent does not match the geography of coastal Africa. This forces us to consider the other, more literal interpretation, a direct westward journey. Could beyond mean a voyage across the Atlantic itself? To modern ears, this sounds absurd. We know the Atlantic is an enormous ocean, and the idea of a Bronze Age or even Stone Age civilization making that crossing seems impossible. But this is where we must shed our modern perspective and step into an ancient one. the ocean was not seen as an empty void but as a celestial river encircling the lands of Europe, Africa, and Asia. Other lands could exist within it. More importantly, the story came from Egyptian priests who claimed it was a memory 9,000 years old. That date, 9,600 years before the Common Era, is not random. It falls at the very end of the last ice age, a time when global sea levels were over 300 feet lower than they are today. Coastlines were radically different. Islands that are now submerged were dry land. The continental shelves, the gently sloping plains that surround continents before dropping into the deep ocean, were vast exposed territories. From the perspective of a sailor at Gibraltar 12,000 years ago, looking west, the world would have looked utterly different. The Atlantic might not have seemed an impassable desert of water, but a sea dotted with stepping stone islands now long drowned. The phrase "beyond the pillars," then, transforms from a simple direction into a haunting memory of a lost geography. It points not to a random island in the Mediterranean, but to a forgotten landscape in the Atlantic that vanished beneath the rising seas as the ice caps melted. This is not about finding a sunken city where our modern maps show only deep ocean. It is about finding the ghost of a continent where there is now only water. This brings us to a place that looks more than any other spot on Earth exactly like the city Plato described. In the vast, empty desert of Mauritania in West Africa, there exists a geological formation so bizarre and perfectly symmetrical it defies belief. From the ground, it is a series of rocky ridges and dry valleys, but from space the truth is revealed. It is the Richat structure, often called the Eye of the Sahara, a series of near-perfect concentric rings etched into the desert floor over 30 miles wide. It is an astonishing sight, a bullseye in the middle of nowhere. When satellite imagery became widely available, the internet erupted. Here, at last, was the concentric city of Atlantis, not under the sea but preserved in the desert sand. The theory, championed by researchers like Jimmy Bright, argues that we have been looking in the wrong element. We searched the ocean, but Atlantis was buried by sand, not water. The evidence seems startling at first glance. Plato wrote of a city built on a plain, surrounded by mountains. The Richat sits on a flat plain, bordered by distant mountain ranges. Plato gave specific dimensions for the rings of land and water. When you scale his measurements, they align remarkably well with the rings of the Richat. The central island, the circular harbors, the Great Canal to the Southern Sea, all appear to map onto this strange landscape. Proponents point to scattered stones that look like worked granite, and they suggest the vast salt flats nearby could be the remnants of an ancient inland sea, the Great Southern Sea Atlantis traded with. It is a compelling visual argument, a puzzle piece that snaps into place with satisfying clarity. You look at that image from space and you cannot unsee it. It feels like finding the blueprint, but geology, as it often does, presents a sobering counterargument. The scientific consensus is firm and well established. The Richat structure is a natural formation, specifically a symmetrical anticline, a dome of layered rock that was uplifted by volcanic forces and then slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, eroded away by wind and water. Those perfect rings are different layers of resistant quartzite and softer sedimentary rock, wearing down at different rates. It is a magnificent example of geological art, but it is art created by natural processes, not by human hands. No archaeological evidence of a massive, advanced Bronze Age metropolis has been found there, only scattered Neolithic tools from much simpler, later societies. The theory's greatest weakness is its own premise. It asks us to believe that a city described as swallowed by the ocean was instead preserved in a desert thousands of feet above sea level. This forces a complete reinterpretation of the cataclysm, from a flood to a desertification event, a shift that the original story does not support. The Eye of the Sahara is a breathtaking red herring, a place so visually perfect for the legend that it tempts us to ignore every other clue. It shows us the power of pattern recognition, our deep desire to see a lost city in a natural wonder. But if this is not the place, it does highlight something crucial. We are now looking on land, not under the sea. And that shift in perspective is the key that finally unlocks the door. The Richat's most compelling evidence lies not just in its shape, but in the land that surrounds it. Proponents point to satellite imagery revealing the ghost of an immense river system, ancient channels that once fed into a vast inland basin just to its south. This, they argue, is the remnant of the Great Southern Sea Plateau described, connected to the capital by a monumental canal. The geology itself offers another tantalizing clue. Plato wrote that the city was built from stones of white, black, and red. The bedrock of the Richat structure is a layered cake of precisely those colors: limestone, dark volcanic basalt, and iron-rich sandstone that weathers to a deep rust red. To a storyteller describing a ruined city millennia later, these striking natural colors could easily become the building materials of legend. Some explorers even report finding scattered, weathered stones in the area that appear to have straight edges and right angles, suggesting they might be the tumbled remains of massive masonry now claimed by the desert. Yet for every piece of suggestive evidence, a powerful counter-argument rises from the sand. The most definitive is the simple fact of elevation. The Richat structure sits nearly 1,000 feet above current sea level. For it to have been swallowed by the ocean, as Plato described, global sea levels would need to have been catastrophically higher, a scenario that contradicts all our geological records of the last 12,000 years. The water did not come to Atlantis here, the water left. The ancient river channels point to a wetter Sahara, a green period that ended as the climate changed and desertification crept in, not a sudden marine cataclysm. Furthermore, if this was a metropolis that sank beneath the waves, we would expect to find submerged ruins, harbor works, or at least a dense layer of maritime artifacts. Instead, archaeological surveys have found only evidence of small, transient Stone Age camps with tools made for hunting and gathering, not for a society capable of bronze metallurgy and transoceanic navigation. The absence is deafening. This creates a fascinating intellectual standoff. The visual and geological parallels are so uncanny they feel intentional, as if the land itself is whispering the story. But the hard facts of elevation and archaeology shout it down. The Richat structure forces us to ask a difficult question: are we seeing a lost city, or are we seeing a natural wonder that perfectly fits the template of a story we already know? It is the ultimate example of apophenia, the human tendency to find meaningful patterns in random data. Our brains are wired for narrative, and when we see concentric rings in a desert, we cannot help but see the ghost of Plato's capital. This makes the Eye of the Sahara a crucial stepping stone in our search, not because it is Atlantis, but because it demonstrates the limits of a land-based theory that ignores the core element of the legend, the sea. The story insists on a drowning. To find a real candidate, we must stop looking for places that merely look the part and start looking for a place that experienced the part, a land that truly vanished beneath the waves. But if the Atlantic is where the story points, and the Mediterranean and the Sahara are dead ends, where in that vast ocean could a continent have vanished? The search pivots sharply to the west, to a region of shallow seas, sunken banks, and one of the most enduring modern mysteries, the Caribbean. Here, the theory takes a dramatic turn, focusing not on a desert eye, but on a road beneath the waves. Just off the coast of Bimini, in the Bahamas, lies a strange underwater formation known as the Bimini Road. Discovered in 1968 by divers, it consists of a long, straight line of massive, rectangular limestone blocks resting on the seafloor in about 20 feet of water. To the untrained eye, it looks uncannily like the ruins of a paved causeway or a collapsed harbor wall, a straight path leading nowhere in the blue haze. Its discovery sent shockwaves through the alternative history community. because it seemed to be a tangible, man-made structure in exactly the kind of location where a lost Atlantic civilization might have built. The timing was electrifying, as it appeared to fulfill a specific prophecy from the famous American psychic Edgar Cayce. Decades earlier, Cayce had claimed in a trance state that records from Atlantis would be found near Bimini and would begin to be uncovered in 1968 or 69. For believers, the Bimini Road was not a coincidence, it was confirmation, a literal signpost to a lost world. The intrigue deepened with sonar scans around nearby Andros Island, the largest in the Bahamas, which revealed what some researchers interpret as geometric shapes and possible pyramid-like structures on the submerged continental shelf. The narrative seemed to be coalescing, pointing to the Caribbean archipelago as the mountaintops of a sunken landmass, with the Bimini Road as its most accessible artifact. Yet, as with all things Atlantis, the scientific consensus offers a far less mystical explanation. Geologists who have studied the site argue convincingly that the Bimini Road is a classic example of natural beach rock. This type of rock forms in the intertidal zone when sand and shell fragments become naturally cemented together by calcium carbonate, the same process that creates the hard crust on many tropical beaches. Over time, as sea levels rose or the land subsided, this sheet of beach rock fractured along natural joints and blocky lines, creating the illusion of cut stone. The straight lines and right angles are not evidence of human toolwork, but of the predictable way layered sedimentary rock breaks under stress, much like the cracks in drying mud. While the idea of a man-made harbor is romantic, no associated artifacts, pottery, tools, or building foundations have ever been found among the blocks. The geology appears to tell a simpler, slower story, one of natural processes rather than ancient engineers. This controversy is the perfect microcosm of the entire Atlantis search, a clash between what we desperately want to see and what the physical evidence actually shows. The Bimini Road is either a miraculous clue or a magnificent accident of nature, and which side you believe depends entirely on whether you trust the vision of a psychic or the hammer of a geologist. But even if the road itself is natural, it forces a vital question: why here? Why does this specific region, with its vast, shallow banks that were dry land at the end of the Ice Age, keep generating such compelling mysteries? The Bimini Road, whether natural or not, points our search toward a far grander stage, the very floor of the Atlantic Ocean itself. This brings us to the most literal interpretation of Plato's clue, and the one that has captured imaginations for over a century, the idea of a true sunken continent. The focus shifts to a specific geological feature, the Azores Plateau. This is a massive, roughly triangular region of unusually shallow seafloor about the size of Spain, located right along the mid-Atlantic ridge, the volcanic mountain range that splits the ocean floor in two. Here, the ocean depth averages around 2,000 meters, far shallower than the abyssal plains around it, and dotted with peaks that rise to form the Azores Islands. To someone convinced Atlantis was a real place in the Atlantic, this plateau is the obvious candidate, a sunken landmass with its mountaintops still poking above the waves. The modern popularity of this idea traces back to a single, influential book published in 1882 by an American congressman named Ignatius Donnelly. His work, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, was a sensation. Donnelly compiled cultural parallels from around the globe, from pyramid building to flood myths, and argued they all stemmed from a common source, a technologically advanced mother civilization that sank in the Atlantic. He proposed the Azores as the last remnants of that lost continent. His work was not rigorous science, but it was compelling storytelling, and it single-handedly revived Atlantis as a subject for serious, if speculative, inquiry. It framed the search in a way that felt geographically correct, placing the lost empire squarely where Plato said it was, beyond the Pillars, in the middle of the ocean. Geologically, the plateau is fascinating. It is a region of thickened oceanic crust, likely formed by a volcanic hotspot that pumped out enormous amounts of lava over millions of years, building up a broad platform. The seamounts and islands we see today, like Pico and Fayal, are the highest points of this drowned platform. During the ice ages, when sea levels were lower, this entire plateau would have been even shallower, and many of these seamounts would have been dry land, creating a potential archipelago. You can almost picture it, a scattered chain of volcanic islands in the mid-Atlantic, a possible stepping stone for ancient cultures. It fits the romantic vision perfectly, a continent now sleeping beneath the waves. But this is where the theory encounters its most devastating and insurmountable obstacle: time. The geology of the mid-Atlantic ridge is one of the most well-understood processes on Earth. The ridge is a divergent boundary where tectonic plates are slowly pulling apart at a rate of about 2.5 centimeters per year. As they separate, magma wells up from below to create new oceanic crust. The Azores Plateau itself was formed by this process, not as a single continent that sank, but as a region of excessive volcanic buildup. Critically, this is not a rapid event. The subsidence and spreading that shaped the plateau occurred over tens of millions of years, a timescale measured in the slow, relentless drift of continents. It is a saga written in stone over epochs. Now hold that reality against Plato's story. His cataclysm was sudden, a single day and night of destruction. The Egyptian priests spoke of an event 9,000 years in their past, not 9 million. The tectonic sinking of the Azores Plateau is a process so glacially slow that no human civilization, no matter how advanced, could have witnessed its beginning and end. It is the difference between watching a tree grow and watching a bomb explode. The timeline mismatch is not a small detail to be explained away. It is a fundamental contradiction that breaks the theory at its core. The Azores represent the right location but the wrong mechanism on a wrong timescale by a factor of 1,000. This leaves us with a profound dilemma. The most geographically satisfying solution is geologically impossible within the framework of the legend. So where does that leave our search? If not a slowly sinking continent, could the memory point to something else that vanished from the Atlantic, something that did disappear in a geological instant? There is a place in the North Sea where fishermen have been pulling up strange artifacts for centuries. Not just ancient bones, but tools, weapons, and even the tusks of mammoths, dredged from the dark seabed between Britain and Denmark. These are not relics washed out to sea. They are the scattered belongings of a drowned world, a continent that vanished beneath the waves in living human memory. This place is called Doggerland, and it presents the most compelling real-world candidate for the Atlantis story. Not because it matches Plato's geography, but because it matches his catastrophe. Doggerland was not a mythic island. It was a vast, fertile plain, larger than many modern European countries, that connected Britain to mainland Europe. For thousands of years after the Ice Age, it was home to thriving Mesolithic communities who hunted its forests and fished its rivers. Then, around 6,150 years before the Common Era, a cataclysm struck. Off the coast of Norway, a massive section of the continental shelf, known as the Storegga Slide, collapsed. This underwater avalanche triggered a tsunami of unimaginable force, a wall of water that raced across the North Sea. For the people of Doggerland, it was the literal definition of a single day and night of misfortune. The surge would have destroyed coastal settlements, reshaped the landscape, and delivered the final, drowning blow to a land already slowly sinking under rising post-glacial seas. The event is not speculation. It is a documented geological fact, with sediment cores and tsunami deposits confirming its timing and devastating power. Here, at last, is a cataclysm that fits the story's emotional core, a sudden, traumatic end to a known world, preserved in the collective memory of the survivors who fled to higher ground in Britain and Europe. The theory proposes that this memory, passed down over generations and across cultures, could have been the seed that grew into the legend of Atlantis. The challenge, however, is monumental and seemingly insurmountable. Plato is unequivocal. His Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Doggerland is in the North Sea, on the wrong side of Europe entirely. To make this fit, proponents must reinterpret the very pillars themselves. They suggest that for the ancient Egyptians, who were the original source of the tale according to Plato, the known world was oriented differently. Perhaps the pillars were not Gibraltar, but another prominent maritime boundary, like the Strait of Dover or even the entrance to the Mediterranean from the Egyptian perspective. It is a difficult linguistic and historical argument, one that requires stretching the text to its breaking point. Yet, the power of the Doggerland hypothesis lies not in its perfect alignment with Plato's words, but in its perfect alignment with human experience. It offers a real, tangible, and tragically lost homeland that met a sudden, watery end. It transforms Atlantis from a philosophical fable about a proud empire into a possible folk memory of our own ancestors, a story of a green land swallowed by the grey sea. This forces us to ask a haunting question. Is the true value of the Atlantis legend not in finding a specific sunken city, but in recognizing it as an echo of a trauma experienced by coastal peoples everywhere, a story told and retold whenever the sea reclaims the land? The story of Atlantis may not be written only in texts but also in ink on ancient parchment. Long before satellite imagery, cartographers were drawing coastlines that should have been impossible for them to know. Two maps in particular stand as monumental anomalies, whispering of lost worlds. The first is the Piri Reis map of 1513, a Turkish naval chart compiled from dozens of older sources, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. What makes this map astonishing is its depiction of the southern landmass. It shows a detailed coastline for a continent we now call Antarctica, but with one impossible detail: it shows the landmass free of ice. According to modern geology, Antarctica's coastline has been buried under a mile-thick ice sheet for at least 6 million years. How could a 16th-century admiral have mapped a coastline hidden for epochs? Theorists argue the map must be a copy of a copy, tracing back to a vastly ancient source civilization that mapped the world before the ice caps formed, a civilization like Atlantis. The second puzzle is the Zeno map of 1380, created by the Venetian Zeno brothers. It depicts a large, detailed island in the North Atlantic called Friesland, an island that does not exist on any modern chart. Yet for centuries, this phantom island appeared on reputable maps, and explorers even claimed to have landed there. Some researchers suggest Friesland is not a total fiction, but a misplaced memory of a real landmass, perhaps the last exposed peaks of a sunken plateau like the Azores, or even a distorted recollection of Greenland or Iceland from a time when sea levels were lower. These maps are seductive evidence. They feel like tangible proof that someone, long before recorded history, possessed advanced geographical knowledge that was later fragmented and lost. The idea is that Atlantis or its survivors mapped the world in a pre-cataclysm age, and fragments of those maps survived in Egyptian or Greek libraries, only to be rediscovered by medieval scholars. Yet we must tread with extreme caution. Cartographic mysteries are not conclusive proof. The Piri Reis maps Antarctica could also be a distorted amalgamation of South America, Australia, and pure conjecture fitted to the edge of the known world. Friesland could be a simple cartographic error, a mischarted island that took on a life of its own through copying. These maps exist in a frustrating middle ground. They are too accurate to dismiss easily, yet too ambiguous to prove anything definitively. They are the tantalizing shadows on the wall of the cave, hinting at a reality just outside our grasp. If they are echoes of Atlantis, they suggest it was not just a local tragedy, but a civilization with a global perspective, whose final gift to the future was a ghostly outline of the world as it once was. Perhaps the true cataclysm was not a local flood but a skyfall, Around 12,800 years ago, Earth was slowly warming, emerging from the last ice age into a new temperate era. Then, without warning, the planet slammed into reverse. Temperatures plummeted across the globe, glaciers began to advance once more, and for over 1,000 years, the world was plunged back into a deep freeze. This bizarre period is known as the Younger Dryas, a climatic U-turn that has long puzzled scientists. What could possibly cause such a sudden and dramatic return to Ice Age conditions? The answer may lie not in the ocean or the Earth, but in the stars. A growing body of evidence points to a catastrophic extraterrestrial impact. The theory, known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, suggests that a fragmented comet or asteroid struck Earth's atmosphere over North America. This was not a single Hollywood-style crater. It was a series of devastating airbursts like cosmic bombs detonating high above the surface, unleashing hellfire across the continent. The evidence for this event is written in the very soil of that time. Researchers have found a thin, dark layer of sediment dated to exactly 12,800 years ago, a layer that spans across multiple continents. Within this layer are microscopic diamonds called nanodiamonds, which form only under the extreme pressures and temperatures of a massive impact. There are also spikes in rare elements like platinum and iridium, metals abundant in asteroids but rare on Earth's surface. And this layer is filled with soot, evidence of continent-spanning wildfires that would have incinerated forests and grasslands, throwing the planet's climate into chaos. Imagine the scene. A fireball brighter than 1,000 suns streaks across the sky, followed by a shockwave of unimaginable force that flattens everything for hundreds of miles. The sky turns black with ash and soot, blocking the sun for years. The burning of entire ecosystems releases vast amounts of freshwater into the atmosphere from melting ice, which falls as snow, accelerating the global deep freeze. This is not a local earthquake or a volcanic eruption. This is a planetary reset button. Now, hold this global catastrophe against Plato's story. His account speaks of earthquakes and floods of extraordinary violence, a punishment from the gods that sank an island in a single day and night. An airburst event of this magnitude would have generated seismic shocks felt around the world and triggered monumental tsunamis. For any coastal civilization, especially one on an island or a continental shelf, it would have been an apocalypse. The timeline here is the most startling alignment. Plato's Egyptian priest spoke of Atlantis falling 9,000 years before Solon, who lived around 600 years before the Common Era. That math places the destruction at roughly 11,600 years ago. The Younger Dryas impact event is dated to 12,800 years ago. While not a perfect match, the dates are strikingly close, separated by only about 1,200 years. A blink in geological time and a plausible margin for error in an oral history passed down for millennia. This shifts the entire search. We are no longer looking for a city that slowly sank due to tectonic subsidence or a local tsunami. We are looking for the possible victims of a global cataclysm, a civilization that may have been erased not by the sea alone, but by a burning sky and the climatic chaos that followed. If Atlantis was real, its end may be recorded not in any human chronicle, but in a layer of diamonds and soot buried deep in the earth. The story of a great flood is the oldest story humanity tells itself. It echoes across every inhabited continent, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh and the biblical tale of Noah, to the Hindu legend of Manu, the Mayan story of the Great Rain, and the countless flood myths of indigenous peoples in the Americas and Australia. The details vary: a god's warning, a righteous man building a boat, animals saved in pairs, but the core catastrophe is identical: a world-drowning deluge sent to cleanse the earth. Plato's account of Atlantis sinking beneath the waves is not an outlier. It is the Greek entry in this universal library of disaster. when we place his specific story of a proud island empire destroyed by the sea beside the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a startling possibility emerges. We may be looking at the same event through two different lenses, one geological and one mythological. The cosmic impact 12,800 years ago provides a physical mechanism powerful enough to generate those global flood memories. Consider the chain of destruction. Multiple comet fragments exploding in the atmosphere would have generated immense heat, igniting wildfires across continents. The seismic energy from these blasts, equivalent to nuclear detonations, would have triggered earthquakes and destabilized ice sheets, but the most immediate horror for any coastal civilization would have been the water. The force of these airbursts slamming into the North American ice sheet or the open ocean would have generated mega tsunamis of unimaginable scale. We are not talking about waves that swamp a beach. We are talking about walls of water hundreds, perhaps even thousands of feet high, traveling at the speed of a jet aircraft, scouring coastlines and surging deep inland. For an island culture or a society living on a low-lying continental shelf, this would have been an inescapable apocalypse arriving in minutes. The cataclysm did not stop with the waves. The soot from global fires and the vast plumes of water vapor thrown into the upper atmosphere would have plunged the planet into a prolonged winter, the Younger Dryas freeze. This climate chaos would have collapsed agriculture, destroyed ecosystems, and made survival a desperate struggle for the scattered remnants of humanity. Entire cultural memories, technologies, and histories could have been lost in that single generation of darkness. This global framework transforms how we view Plato's story. The concentric city, the advanced technology, the naval empire, these could be the embellishments of 1,000 retellings, the specific cultural costume placed on a universal trauma. But the core memory, the heart-stopping fear of the ocean rising up in fury to erase everything that feels real. It feels like a direct translation of lived experience into myth. The Egyptian priests telling Solon this tale 9,000 years later were not preserving a precise historical record. They were likely preserving the emotional truth of their ancestors, a story of a great civilization from before the flood, a warning about hubris, and a testament to the terrifying power of nature. Atlantis, then, may be the most detailed and localized version of a story that belongs to all of us. It is the potential historical kernel, the name we give to whichever advanced coastal society was most dramatically erased when the sky fell and the seas rose. Its true location becomes less important than its symbolic truth, a marker for the day the world changed forever. The idea of a lost world under the ice is the ultimate expression of our search. If every other place on the map has been ruled out, then perhaps the answer lies on a map of its own, at the very bottom of the world. This is the Antarctica theory, a concept so audacious it pushes the Atlantis legend to its absolute geographical limit. The premise is simple yet staggering, that the frozen continent of Antarctica was not always frozen, and that beneath its mile-thick ice cap lie the ruins of Plato's advanced civilization, preserved in a deep freeze for millennia. The theory's modern architect was a professor named Charles Hapgood. In the 1950s, he proposed a radical geological idea called Earth crustal displacement. He suggested that the entire outer crust of the planet could, at times, shift as a single unit over the molten mantle below, like the loose skin of an orange sliding around the fruit inside. According to Hapgood, such a shift could have moved Antarctica from a temperate latitude, where a civilization like Atlantis could thrive, to its current position at the South Pole, where it rapidly froze over. This catastrophic event, he argued, would explain the sudden extinction of woolly mammoths found flash frozen with food still in their stomachs, and it would provide a perfect mechanism for the sinking of a continent not by water but by ice. The theory gained a famous supporter in Albert Einstein, who wrote a supportive foreword to one of Hapgood's books, intrigued by the geological evidence for crustal movement. For Atlantis seekers, this was a scientific key that unlocked the ultimate hiding place. All the other clues could now be reinterpreted. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules becomes a symbolic direction, meaning the farthest, most unknown place imaginable. The cataclysm of earthquakes and floods aligns with the global upheaval of a crustal shift. And here, the Piri Rise map returns with renewed force. That enigmatic 1513 chart, which appears to show Antarctica's coastline free of ice, is held up as the ultimate proof, a surviving map from an ancient civilization that charted the continent before it was glaciated. It is a breathtaking narrative, a grand unification of mystery maps, extinction events, and the ultimate lost city. The logistical appeal is powerful. It explains why we have never found Atlantis, because it is sealed under a continent of ice, inaccessible and pristine. Yet when we subject this idea to the harsh light of modern science, it faces insurmountable barriers. The most definitive is the age of the Antarctic ice sheet. Ice core samples, which read the planet's climate history like tree rings, show that Antarctica has been covered in a stable, continent-spanning ice sheet for at least 15 million years, and likely for over 30 million. This is not a timescale of thousands of years, but of millions. A crustal displacement rapid enough to move a continent and freeze it within human history would have generated cataclysmic volcanic activity, pole shifts, and a total rearrangement of the world's geography that simply is not in the geological record. The Earth's crust is broken into tectonic plates that move independently, not as a single shell. Furthermore, extensive surveys of the subglacial topography of Antarctica using radar and seismic imaging have revealed a landscape of ancient mountains and deep valleys, but none of the geometric patterns or large-scale structures one would associate with a vast, engineered metropolis. The theory requires us to believe that an advanced civilization arose, built a continent-sized empire, and was entombed in ice on a landmass that has been frozen since long before the first ancestors of humankind walked the Earth. The Antarctica theory, in the end, is less a viable hypothesis and more a cultural landmark. It represents the furthest reach of the Atlantis legend, a point where logical search gives way to pure, unbounded imagination. When every other corner of the globe is accounted for, the human mind looks to the last blank space on the map and says, what if it is there? It is a testament not to the location of a lost city, but to the relentless power of the story itself, a story so compelling it can convince us to look for warmth beneath the eternal ice. But what if we have been looking in the wrong ocean entirely? A revolutionary theory now points the search away from the Atlantic, away from the Mediterranean, and toward a place of breathtaking altitude, the Altiplano of Bolivia in South America. Here, on a plateau higher than most mountains, a researcher named Jim Allen presents a case that is both geographically precise and startlingly literal. He argues that every key detail in Plato's description finds its mirror not under the sea, but on this high plain. The core of Plato's account describes a vast, rectangular plain, surrounded on all sides by lofty mountains that came right down to the sea. This has always been a confusing detail. How can a plain be both surrounded by mountains and open to the ocean? The Altiplano provides a radical answer. It is a massive, remarkably flat plateau, roughly rectangular in shape, cradled by the towering peaks of the Andes, and critically, this plain was once filled with water. In the ancient past, it was the bed of a huge inland sea known as Lake Minchin. The mountains did indeed come down to the water's edge, creating the exact geography that seemed so contradictory elsewhere. Plato also wrote that Atlantis was rich beyond measure in metals, specifically mentioning gold, silver, copper, and the mysterious orichalcum. The Andes Mountains are among the most mineral-rich ranges on Earth, famous for their vast deposits of precisely those metals. The region was the heart of the Inca Empire's wealth, and ancient mines there date back thousands of years. As for orichalcum, Allen suggests it could refer to a naturally occurring alloy of gold and copper found in the area, which has a distinctive reddish gold glow. The theory then turns to the most iconic feature of the Bolivian Altiplano today, the Salar de Uyuni. This is the world's largest salt flat, a blinding white expanse that stretches to the horizon. But 12,000 years ago, this was not a dry crust of salt. It was part of that vast inland sea. Allen proposes that the concentric rings of Atlantis' capital city were not built on a hill in an ocean, but on an island within this immense lake. He points to a specific location near the present-day Lake Pupo, where satellite imagery reveals strange, circular patterns and raised terraces that could be interpreted as the ghostly outlines of artificial rings, now eroded and buried by sediment. The cataclysm in this scenario was not the sea rising but the lake draining. A massive tectonic event, an earthquake of unimaginable scale, could have ripped open the mountains that contained the inland sea. The waters would have poured out in a catastrophic flood, draining the metropolis and leaving behind the desolate salt desert we see today. This explains the sinking not as a submersion, but as a disappearance. The city left high and dry and abandoned as its lifeblood, the water fled away. The Altiplano theory forces us to reconsider everything. It matches the physical description with an accuracy no other site can claim. It provides a plausible source for the legendary metals. And it offers a catastrophic mechanism that fits the scale of the story. But it also demands a colossal leap, that a story from Egyptian priests was actually a memory of a civilization in the heart of South America, a connection across an ocean the ancients supposedly could not cross. Is this the key that finally unlocks the puzzle? Or is it another case of finding a place that fits the description and willing the history to match? The numbers Plato provides are shockingly precise. He describes the Great Plain of Atlantis as measuring 3,000 stadia by 2,000, an oblong rectangle. For centuries, scholars have debated the length of a stadium, but using the most common Attic measurement, this translates to a plain roughly 340 miles long by 230 miles wide. Now look at a map of the Bolivian Altiplano. Its dimensions are almost exactly 300 miles by 200 miles. The correlation is so precise it feels deliberate, as if someone was describing this specific South American plateau with a Greek unit of measurement. This is not a vague resemblance, it is a dimensional match that no other proposed site can claim. Beyond the shape, the resources align perfectly. Plato wrote that Atlantis was rich with gold, silver, copper, and the legendary orichalcum. The Andes Mountains encircling the Altiplano are a treasure chest of these exact metals. The region was the silver mining heart of the Spanish Empire, and ancient tin and copper mines dot the landscape. As for orichalcum, the mysterious metal that gleamed like fire, researchers point to a natural alloy called tembaga, used by pre-Columbian cultures, which blends gold and copper to create a distinctive reddish gold sheen. The land itself provides the very wealth the story demands. Then there is the catastrophe. The Altiplano is one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, straddling massive tectonic faults. It is also home to Lake Titicaca, one of the world's highest navigable lakes, which sits astride the border of Bolivia and Peru. Geological evidence shows this area has experienced colossal floods in the ancient past. A massive earthquake could have shattered natural dams or caused the vast prehistoric lake that once covered the plain to rupture and drain catastrophically. For a civilization built on the shores of that inland sea, this would have been an apocalypse. The water, their source of life, commerce, and defense, would have vanished in a geological instant, leaving their city stranded in a sudden desert, a literal sinking of their world as they knew it. The story of a civilization punished by the gods with earthquakes and floods fits this landscape like a glove, yet the critique is immediate and obvious. Atlantis sank beneath the sea. The Altiplano is 12,000 feet above it, locked inland, a mountain plateau. How can this possibly be the same place? Proponents offer a radical reinterpretation of the keywords. The term sea, they argue, need not mean an ocean. for a culture living on the shores of a vast inland sea like the ancient Lake Minchin. That immense body of water was their sea. Its disappearance would be remembered as the sea swallowing their land. As for the famous clue beyond the Pillars of Hercules, this might be the greatest misunderstanding of all. Jim Allen and others suggest the story, passed from South America to Egypt via ancient trade routes, could have been garbled over millennia. The original description might have pointed to a location beyond a different set of pillars, perhaps a notable mountain pass or strait in the Andes that was lost in translation. By the time the tale reached Plato, it was grafted onto the familiar Mediterranean geography of his world. The Pillars of Hercules became a convenient marker for a land that was, in truth, beyond a completely different horizon. This hypothesis forces a profound shift in perspective. It asks us to see the Atlantis legend not as a Mediterranean mystery accidentally placed in the Atlantic, but as a New World story accidentally imported into Old World mythology. It suggests a thread of contact or memory stretching back to the end of the last ice age, a thread that carried the echo of a real catastrophe on a high plateau to the temples of Egypt. The Altiplano theory does not just offer a location, it offers a complete rereading of the text where every puzzling detail finds a physical home. But if this is true, it raises an even more explosive question. What civilization could have existed there 12,000 years ago, and what happened to it? One of the most specific and strangest details in Plato's account is that Atlantis had elephants. In his dialogue Critias, he describes the Great Plain as home to herds of these massive creatures. For any serious theory, this is not a trivial aside. It is a monumental clue, a biological fact that immediately eliminates vast swaths of the globe. In Plato's time, elephants were known to live in two places, Africa and India. They were exotic, powerful symbols of distant lands, but they were not creatures of the European North, the Mediterranean islands, or the open Atlantic Ocean. Any candidate for Atlantis located in those regions suddenly faces an impossible question: where did the elephants come from? This single detail has sunk more theories than any flood. It makes the popular Mediterranean candidates like Santorini or Tartessos utterly implausible. It rules out the Azores plateau and any northern location like Doggerland. Elephants force the search toward a tropical or subtropical climate, a place where such megafauna could truly thrive. This biological lock seems to point the compass firmly back toward Africa or perhaps the edge of Asia. But there is another, far more astonishing possibility that lies on the other side of the world. The Bolivian Altiplano theory confronts this elephant problem head-on, and its answer is as precise as it is revolutionary. The elephants of Atlantis, it proposes, were not African or Asian at all. They were a different but remarkably similar creature, a native South American proboscidean called Cuvironeus. This was a distant cousin of the mammoth and the modern elephant, a large, trunked animal that roamed the high plains and foothills of the Andes. Fossil evidence confirms that Cuvironeus lived in the region, including the Altiplano, until the very end of the last ice age, right around the time frame Plato's story suggests for Atlantis's fall. For the people living alongside them, these animals would have been elephants in every practical sense, massive, intelligent herbivores that shaped the landscape and the human imagination. When the story of a great civilization on a high plain was eventually carried across the ocean, the tellers would have naturally described these magnificent beasts as elephants, because that was the closest known equivalent for listeners in Africa or Europe. This connection is startling because it is so specific. It is not a vague mention of large animals. It is a direct reference to a type of creature that had no business being in most of the proposed Atlantean locations, but which fits perfectly in one. The presence of Cuvironeus on the Altiplano provides a piece of evidence that is both concrete and ancient, anchoring the legend to a real ecosystem that vanished alongside the climate of the Ice Age. It supports a timeline that is not thousands but tens of thousands of years old, a memory from a time when humans shared the new world with now extinct megafauna. And it forges a potential transatlantic link, a thread of memory where the strange creatures of South America became the elephants in a story told beside the Nile. This detail moves the theory from a curious geographical match into the realm of specific cross-continental evidence. It suggests the story is not just a philosophical fable, but a layered artifact containing within it a genuine, anachronistic memory of a lost world, preserved like a fossil in the bedrock of the legend. The legendary metal orichalcum is a riddle wrapped inside the larger mystery of Atlantis. Plato describes it with a reverence that makes it feel tangible. He writes that the metal was mined only in Atlantis, that it shone with a fiery red light, and that it was considered second in value only to gold, used to cover the walls of the innermost temple sanctuary. This is not a vague mention of treasure, it is a specific material with unique properties, a crucial piece of technological and cultural evidence. For centuries, scholars have tried to identify what real substance this glowing metal could have been. The most common theory is that orichalcum was a form of brass, an alloy of copper and zinc that can have a reddish golden hue. The Romans had a similar metal called orichalcum, meaning gold copper, which they used for coins. Others have suggested it might refer to amber, which can glow warmly, or to a specific type of highly prized mountain copper ore. Each interpretation tries to ground the myth in a known material from the ancient world. But what if we are looking in the wrong ancient world? If we follow the trail of this metallic clue to the Andes, the story of orichalcum transforms from a Mediterranean curiosity into a powerful piece of corroborating evidence. The Andes are not just rich in gold and silver, they are one of the greatest copper provinces on the planet. More importantly, the region holds vast deposits of tin, the other essential ingredient for making bronze. Ancient mines in Bolivia and Peru, like the famous Cerro Rico, show evidence of extraction going back thousands of years, long before the Inca Empire. A civilization with access to these resources would have possessed advanced metallurgical knowledge. They could have perfected alloys that appeared miraculous to outsiders. The natural alloy tumbaga, a blend of gold and copper used extensively by pre-Columbian cultures, fits Plato's description perfectly. It has a distinctive reddish gold luster that seems to glow from within. For a people living in the mineral-rich Altiplano, surrounded by veins of copper, tin, gold, and silver, the development of a prized, glowing metal would be a logical achievement, not a myth. This transforms orichalcum from a poetic detail into a potential archaeological fingerprint. The story of a continent that mined a unique, fiery metal could be a distorted memory of South America's incredible mineral wealth and the advanced metalworking of its ancient peoples, carried across the ocean and woven into the fabric of the Atlantis legend. It is as if the myth preserved the echo of a real technological wonder, the gleam of Andean bronze mistaken for the treasure of a sunken island. A civilization does not vanish without leaving traces in the world it leaves behind. If Atlantis was a real, advanced society that collapsed in a great cataclysm, where did its people go? One of the most persistent ideas is that the survivors scattered, carrying the seeds of their knowledge to the far corners of the earth, becoming the mysterious teachers who helped jump-start other ancient cultures. This is the grand theory of cultural diffusion, and it asks us to see the fingerprints of a lost mother culture everywhere we look. The most striking evidence offered is architectural. How do we explain the sudden appearance of monumental pyramid building in two parts of the world that, according to mainstream history, had no contact? In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza rises with geometric precision. Across the Atlantic in Mesoamerica, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan commands a vast ceremonial city. Both are colossal, oriented to celestial events and central to their respective civilizations. To diffusionists, this cannot be a coincidence. It must be the legacy of a common teacher, a shared blueprint from a lost civilization that knew how to build on a godlike scale. The parallels extend beyond shape. We see a global fascination with carving massive stone heads from the Moai of Easter Island to the Olmec heads of Mexico. There are startling similarities in mythology, like the story of a great flood sent by displeased gods, found in Sumerian tablets, the Bible, and Mayan texts. Even linguistic puzzles are presented, like potential links between ancient Basque, certain Native American languages, and even Sanskrit, suggesting a lost linguistic root from a common ancestral culture. The narrative is powerfully romantic. It paints a picture of wise survivors in great ships landing on foreign shores, teaching hunter-gatherers how to quarry stone, chart the stars, and build empires. It transforms Atlantis from a single lost island into the cradle of all civilization, a poignant explanation for humanity's sudden leap from simple tribes to pyramid builders. But the academic world pushes back with equal force. The principle of independent invention is a cornerstone of anthropology. It holds that humans, faced with similar challenges and opportunities, often arrive at similar solutions without any contact. The pyramid form is not a magical secret. It is a stable, logical way to build tall and impressive structures with stone. The need to create monumental architecture to honor gods and rulers is a near-universal human impulse. The flood myth is perhaps the easiest to explain independently. Almost every coastal and riverine culture on Earth has experienced a devastating flood, and it is only natural that such a trauma would become central to their storytelling. The supposed linguistic connections often rely on selective word comparisons while ignoring vast grammatical differences, and the genetic and archaeological records show clear, separate developmental paths for Old World and New World civilizations. This creates a fascinating intellectual stalemate. One side sees a web of connections too intricate to be chance. The other sees a pattern imposed by our desire for a simpler, more connected ancient world. The truth likely lies somewhere in the murky middle. Could there have been sporadic, forgotten contacts across oceans that left faint cultural impressions? It is possible, but the idea of a single, global mother culture seeding all advanced knowledge faces the immense weight of evidence for humanity's incredible, innate capacity for innovation in isolation. This debate does not diminish the mystery of Atlantis, it expands it. It forces us to ask a deeper question. Are we searching for one lost civilization, or are we sensing the ghostly outlines of many? The Great Flood at the end of the last ice age was a global event. It would not have drowned just one advanced society. It could have erased dozens of coastal cultures, each with their own pyramids, their own stories, their own forgotten technologies. Atlantis, then, might be the one name that survived, a placeholder for all the lost worlds that sank beneath the rising seas. This timescale is the single greatest obstacle for any realistic Atlantis. 9,000 years is an almost incomprehensible span of time, longer than all of recorded history. How could any story, any memory, survive intact across 300 generations without writing? Skeptics rightly call this the fatal flaw, the proof that Plato was crafting philosophy, not recording history. But to dismiss the legend on this point alone might be a profound mistake. It assumes that oral tradition is a fragile game of telephone where whispers distort beyond recognition. Modern research reveals something far more powerful. Oral tradition is not a casual chat, it is a sacred technology for preserving truth across millennia. Consider the indigenous cultures of Australia. For over 60,000 years, they have maintained detailed knowledge of the land through songlines and stories. Researchers have identified specific Aboriginal narratives that describe coastlines and islands that have been underwater for more than 7,000 years, since the end of the last ice age. These are not vague tales of a great flood. They are precise accounts of which watering holes were lost, which hunting grounds were submerged, passed down with meticulous care from parent to child for over 250 generations. The geological record confirms the sea level rise, and the stories remember it. This is not an isolated case. Similar ancient memories exist in Native American lore of the Great Lakes region, describing geological events like the formation of Niagara Falls that date back thousands of years. These traditions work because they are not casual anecdotes. They are formal, structured, and ritualized. Key details are embedded in song, dance, ceremony, and art, repeated with strict adherence to form. The core facts become immutable, while the peripheral details, the names of heroes or the specific colors of a garment, might adapt to the language of the day. Apply this lens to Atlantis. The Egyptian priests who told Solon the story were not gossiping. They were likely reciting a formal record from their temple archives, a sacred narrative preserved as part of their duty to the gods. The core pillars of that story are remarkably consistent: a great and powerful civilization possessing advanced skills, living on an island or a coastal plain that was destroyed in a sudden, catastrophic flood sent by divine judgment. These are the kind of dramatic, moral, and traumatic details that become the backbone of an enduring myth. The specific name Atlantis, the exact measurements of the city, the number of kings, these could be later additions or translations. But the central trauma, the loss of a mighty people to the sea, is the kind of cataclysm that etches itself into the soul of a culture. It becomes a warning, an explanation for ruins found in the sea, a story told to children about the power of the gods and the ocean. So the question shifts. It is not could a story survive that long, but what kind of story would be chosen to survive? A story of a glorious kingdom that sinned and was erased by the waves is a perfect vehicle for moral instruction and geological memory. It carries the truth of a real disaster within the shell of a legend. To dismiss Plato's entire account because of the impossible timeline is to ignore how human memory actually works across deep time. We are not throwing out the bathwater. We might be carefully pouring it away while overlooking the baby still in the tub. The flood is likely real. The advanced civilization might be an embellishment of a simpler, yet still impressive coastal culture. But the heart of the story, the drowning of a world, beats with the rhythm of a true and terrifying event. The evidence for a real Atlantis presents us with a stark choice. We can cling to the familiar but flawed candidates, or we can follow the clues to a conclusion that feels alien yet astonishingly complete. The Mediterranean frontrunner, Santorini, offers a cataclysm but fails on every other count. It is in the wrong sea, far too small, and its destruction is off by 8,000 years. The Azores plateau sits in the correct ocean, but its sinking is a process of millions of years, a geological snail's pace that bears no resemblance to a single day and night of ruin. The Eye of the Sahara provides a breathtaking visual match, but it stands 1,000 feet above the sea, a victim of desertification, not a drowning. Doggerland gives us a perfect human-scale catastrophe, yet it is on the wrong side of Europe, its North Sea location contradicting the story's most basic directional clue. Each of these theories explains one piece of the puzzle by ignoring several others. They ask us to bend the legend until it fits a predetermined location. But what if one place does not require us to bend the story, but instead reveals its hidden shape? The case for the Bolivian Altiplano is not built on a single eureka moment, but on a convergence of answers. It begins with the most literal clue of all, the dimensions. Plato's rectangular plane, 3,000 stadia by 2,000, is not a mythical abstraction. It is a near-perfect description of the high Andean plateau, a geographical match of precision no other site on Earth can claim. This is not a place that looks vaguely like the description, it is a place that fits the blueprint. The resources align with uncanny specificity. The legend demands abundant gold, silver, copper, and the mysterious orichalcum. The encircling Andes are a treasure vault of these exact metals, home to ancient mines and the natural alloy tumbaga, which gleams with the fiery, reddish-gold light described. Then there are the elephants. This bizarre, specific detail eliminates almost every other candidate. Yet on the Altiplano, the fossil record confirms the presence of Cuvironeus, a native proboscidean that roamed there until the end of the last ice age. The story's most puzzling biological footnote becomes a powerful piece of corroborating evidence, anchoring the tale to a real, lost ecosystem. The cataclysm itself finds a plausible mechanism here. This is one of the most seismically active regions on the planet, a landscape torn by faults and prone to colossal floods. A great earthquake could have shattered the natural dams containing the vast inland sea that once covered the plain. The resulting deluge and drainage would have been an apocalypse for a lakeside civilization, a sinking of their world as the water that defined it vanished. This event aligns with the global chaos of the Younger Dryas impact period, a time of climatic upheaval and megafaunal extinction that fits the story's ancient timeline far better than the slow tectonics of the Atlantic. No theory is perfect. The Altiplano's greatest hurdle is its altitude and inland location, seemingly contradicting the phrase "sunk beneath the sea." But if the sea was a vast interior lake and the cataclysm was its catastrophic draining, the core memory of a world lost to water remains tragically intact. The Pillars of Hercules may be a later Mediterranean framing for a story that originated beyond a completely different set of mountains. This hypothesis asks for a major reinterpretation, yet it is the only one that solves the major puzzles of size, resources, wildlife, and catastrophe without ignoring the text or defying geology. It presents Atlantis not as a philosophical fantasy, but as a possible folk memory of a real and magnificent culture that thrived on a high plateau when the world was younger, only to be erased when the sky fell and their seed drained away. The story survived because it was true enough and terrible enough to be unforgettable. Perhaps the entire search is based on a profound misunderstanding. What if Plato never intended for anyone to find Atlantis on a map? We have been treating his dialogues as a treasure hunt, but what if they were always meant to be a mirror? To understand this, we must remember who Plato was and why he wrote. He was not a historian or a geographer. He was a philosopher, one of the greatest thinkers of all time, consumed by questions of justice, virtue, and the ideal society. His famous work, The Republic, is a blueprint for a perfect state ruled by philosopher kings. The story of Atlantis appears in his later works, Timaeus and Critias, and it is presented not as a standalone adventure, but as an illustration within a larger philosophical conversation. The context is everything. Socrates has just described his vision of the perfect city. Then, Critias offers the tale of Atlantis as a real-world example from the deep past, a story of a magnificent civilization that once existed and then fell, to show that such an ideal state is not just a dream, but something that could have been real. Yet for Plato, the purpose of a story was never just to record facts. It was to teach a lesson. He used myths and allegories constantly to make complex ideas accessible and memorable. The famous allegory of the cave is not about actual prisoners in a cavern. It is a metaphor for enlightenment and the struggle to perceive truth. Viewed through this lens, Atlantis transforms. It becomes a philosophical fable, a cautionary tale about the cycle of civilizations. Think about its narrative arc. Atlantis begins as a utopia, blessed by the gods with wealth, advanced technology, and a perfect constitution. Its people are virtuous, wise, and live in harmony. But over generations, as Plato writes, the divine portion within them began to fade, diluted by too much mortal admixture. They grew arrogant, greedy, and imperialistic. Their hearts turned from wisdom to conquest. This moral decay is the true catastrophe, the crack that brings down the entire edifice. The earthquake and the flood are merely the physical manifestations of divine judgment, the natural world responding to moral collapse. The story is not really about a city sinking, it is about a society sinking into corruption. This interpretation solves every geographical and chronological inconsistency at a stroke. The impossible size, the 9,000-year timeline, the precise yet unfindable location, these are not clues, they are literary devices. They place the story in a mythic past, a time outside of ordinary history, to give it the weight of eternal truth. The fantastic details, the rings of water, the orichalcum, the elephants, they are set dressing designed to impress upon the listener the sheer grandeur of what was lost, making the fall all the more tragic and instructive. Plato's audience would have understood this. They were steeped in a tradition where myths carried deeper meanings. The tale of Atlantis served as the perfect counterpoint to his description of the ideal Athens that defeated it. It showed the triumph of a modest, virtuous city-state over a bloated, aggressive empire. It was a warning to his fellow Athenians, whose own democracy was showing signs of imperial overreach and moral decay during his lifetime. So why does this matter to our search? Because it reveals that our centuries-long obsession with pinning Atlantis to a map might be missing the entire point. The enduring power of the legend is not in its coordinates but in its questions. It forces us to reflect on the rise and fall of our own societies. What is the price of technological advancement without wisdom? Can wealth and power ever be stable without justice and humility? Every civilization carries within it the seeds of its own Atlantis, the potential for greatness and the risk of catastrophic hubris. Our desperate hunt for a physical location from the Mediterranean to the Andes speaks to a deeper, almost spiritual longing. We are not just looking for drowned stones, we are searching for a lost golden age, a time when humanity was wiser, more connected, and more in tune with the divine. Atlantis, as a philosophical idea, represents that paradise lost. It is a story we tell ourselves about our own potential and our perennial fear of failure. The real mystery, then, is not where Atlantis sank, but why we so desperately need to believe it was ever real at all. The search for Atlantis has moved from ancient texts to the glowing screens of mission control. Today, the hunt is powered by technologies that would seem like magic to Plato, tools that let us strip away ocean water or jungle canopy with the click of a mouse. The most transformative is satellite archaeology. Scientists now scan freely available satellite imagery, looking for subtle variations in vegetation or soil moisture that betray the presence of buried walls, roads, or canals. These spectral fingerprints have revealed lost cities in the Cambodian jungle and ancient settlements in the Egyptian desert, proving that entire civilizations can hide in plain sight, waiting for the right lens to see them. This same method is applied to proposed Atlantis sites, analyzing the Altiplano for geometric patterns or scanning the shallow banks of the Bahamas for anomalies that natural erosion cannot explain. Beneath the waves, the search grows even more sophisticated. Side-scan sonar vessels now methodically map the seafloor, painting detailed acoustic pictures of underwater mountains, valleys, and potential ruins. Autonomous underwater vehicles, or a UVS, glide through the depths for days, collecting high-resolution data in places too dangerous or remote for human divers. These tools are not looking for a single artifact, they are digitally draining the ocean square mile by square mile to reconstruct the lost landscapes of the last ice age. In the North Sea, systematic surveys of the Dogger Bank have mapped the submerged hills and river valleys of Doggerland, identifying potential prehistoric settlement sites and hunting grounds drowned by rising seas. In the Caribbean, research vessels have mapped the vast, shallow Great Bahama Bank, searching for any sign of human alteration on the limestone bedrock now 100 feet underwater. Perhaps the most revolutionary tool is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Mounted on planes or drones, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground, penetrating dense forest canopies to create a precise, three-dimensional map of the bare earth below. In South America, LiDAR has unveiled sprawling, previously unknown Mayan megalopolises in the Guatemalan jungle, networks of roads and farms that rewrite history books. This technology could be the key to finally surveying the remote reaches of the Bolivian Altiplano or the Amazon basin, searching for the large-scale, geometric earthworks that a sophisticated ancient culture might have left behind. It allows us to see the forest for the trees and, more importantly, to see the ancient city for the forest. This modern quest is no longer confined to university labs. The mystery of Atlantis has spawned a global community of citizen scientists. Online platforms allow anyone with an internet connection to examine satellite imagery, tagging potential archaeological sites or unusual formations. Enthusiasts comb through sonar data released by oceanographic institutes, looking for straight lines or perfect circles on the seabed that might have been missed. While this sometimes leads to false alarms, like natural geological features mistaken for pyramids, it also represents a democratization of discovery. The collective power of millions of curious eyes can process more data than any single research team, turning the search into a collaborative planetary effort. The sobering truth is that we have now surveyed more of the surface of Mars in high definition than we have of our own ocean floor. Vast stretches of the Atlantic basin, especially the deep plains and the rugged slopes of the mid-Atlantic ridge, remain uncharted at the resolution needed to identify potential ruins. This means the smoking gun evidence could still be out there, resting in the eternal darkness, waiting for the right submersible to switch on its lights. It might be a meticulously carved stone anchor on the slopes of the Azores plateau, a collection of worked stones half buried in the silt off Bimini, or even the foundation lines of a massive structure on a now-drowned Caribbean shelf. The technology to find it exists. The search has evolved from interpreting stories to scanning the planet itself, a silent, electronic vigil for a world that vanished. The next chapter of this 10,000-year-old mystery may not be written by a philosopher with a stylus, but by a robot sending a pixelated image from the abyss. This enduring mystery has long since escaped the pages of Plato, finding a vibrant second life in our modern dreams. The legend of Atlantis has become a cornerstone of popular culture, a flexible backdrop for adventure, wonder, and warning. It appears in the lush, Art Deco-inspired machinery of Disney's Atlantis, the Lost Empire, where explorers seek a civilization powered by a mysterious crystal. It lurks in the shadowy plots of the Indiana Jones films, a potential source of unfathomable power for villains and heroes alike. Comic books from Aquaman to Marvel have placed it as the sunken homeland of superheroes, while video games like Tomb Raider and BioShock use its aesthetic of decayed grandeur to build entire worlds. Each retelling reinvents the myth, but the core ingredients remain startlingly consistent: advanced technology, architectural wonder, and a profound sense of loss. This relentless recycling reveals something fundamental about us. Atlantis captivates because it answers a deep human yearning. It represents the ultimate lost paradise, a golden age where humanity was wiser, more connected, and in harmony with advanced knowledge we can scarcely comprehend. It is a blank canvas for our hopes about the past and our anxieties about the future. In a world where history feels fully mapped, Atlantis is the last great blank space, a promise that wonders still await discovery, not in distant galaxies, but hidden in the forgotten corners of our own planet. Furthermore, the story channels our primal fear of nature's power. The image of a magnificent civilization erased in a day is the ultimate cautionary tale about hubris and fragility. It reminds us that no matter how grand our cities or how advanced our science, we are still at the mercy of the planet's immense, unpredictable forces. The cataclysm is a dramatic shorthand for climate change, for asteroid threats, for any existential risk that looms on our horizon. We are drawn to the tragedy because we see a reflection of our own potential fate. Ultimately, the search for a physical Atlantis may be secondary. Its true power lies in its role as a perpetual idea. It is a story we tell ourselves about forgotten origins and possible destinies. Whether it existed as a city of bronze on a Bolivian lake or only in the mind of a Greek philosopher is almost irrelevant to its cultural function. Atlantis endures because it is a mirror. We look into its drowned halls and see our own ambitions, our fears of collapse, and our unshakable hope that somewhere, a better, smarter version of us once thrived, and that its legacy might still be found. So the map of the ancient world is not what we thought. Our journey has taken us from the crowded shores of the Mediterranean, past the viral mirage of the Sahara's eye, across the phantom roads of the Caribbean, and finally to the thin air of the Andean Altiplano. At every turn, the most famous candidates for Atlantis crumbled under the weight of their own contradictions. They were in the wrong place or the wrong time, or they failed to account for the elephants in the room. The evidence that remains, when pieced together without forcing it, points not to a sunken continent in the Atlantic, but to a drowned world on a high-altitude plain in South America. It is a story written in the precise dimensions of the Bolivian plateau, in the fossil bones of its native proboscideans, and in the mineral wealth of the surrounding mountains, all linked to a global cataclysm 12,000 years ago. This is not a perfect fit, for no theory ever will be with a story this ancient, but it is the only one that solves the major puzzles without breaking the text or defying the geology. It suggests the core of Plato's tale is not a Greek invention, but a distant, distorted memory of a real catastrophe that reshaped the human world. Whether you accept this location or hold out for another, the ultimate value of the Atlantis legend may lie beyond geography. It functions as both history and allegory, a dual challenge to our understanding. As history, it dares us to look past the familiar narratives of the ancient world and consider the possibility of lost chapters, of sophisticated cultures erased by rising seas and falling skies. It reminds us that history is written by the survivors, and that entire worlds can be buried not just beneath the waves, but under ice, desert sand, or a crust of salt. As allegory, its warning is timeless. A society grows advanced, wealthy, and proud, only to be humbled by the forces it thought it could master. That cycle echoes in every civilization story, including our own. So the search does not end here, it simply changes. The question is no longer just where is Atlantis, but what does our relentless need to find it say about us? Are we seeking a lost city, or are we searching for a lost part of ourselves, a memory of a time before the fall? I want to know what you think. Does the evidence for the Altiplano convince you, or does your mind cling to another possibility? The debate is what keeps history alive. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to join the search for more forgotten worlds, subscribe and stay curious. The past is never as simple as it seems, and the next great mystery is always waiting.